Welcome back to Night Whispers, where horror drifts quietly between dreams and nightmares. Tonight's story is The Lighthouse of Lost Souls, a tale of isolation, whispers in the fog, and a light that remembers more than it should. So settle in. Breathe deeply. And listen closely. The letter arrived that morning, slipped under my door like a whisper from another world. No signature. No return address. Only a single line, smeared slightly by drizzle, come before midnight. The light remembers those who linger. I stared at it for a long while. My first thought was that it must be a prank. Yet something in the words pulled at me, an invisible current dragging me forward. By evening, I was driving along the coastal road, the sky heavy with clouds, wind whipping across the cliffs. The lighthouse appeared before the road did, rising through thick, rolling fog like a sentinel from another era. Its paint was weathered and gray, its foundation darkened with moss and salt. The beacon at the top stood still, broken, or waiting. I parked at the cliff's edge, gravel crunching under my tires, and approached on foot. The wind tugged at my coat, howling as if urging me to turn back. Yet each step closer felt like crossing a threshold into another world. Fog swallowed me whole as I reached the first steps leading up to the lighthouse door. The stone was slick and ancient, worn by countless storms. Shadows shifted in ways they shouldn't, and I caught glimpses of figures at the edge of vision. Gone the moment I turned my head, the heavy door groaned as I pushed it open. Inside smelled of damp wood and rust. Dust lay thick across the floorboards, broken only by faint footprints I couldn't explain. Somewhere above, a spiral staircase twisted upward like a spine of memory, waiting to be climbed, and with each step, the lighthouse seemed to breathe, as if it had been waiting for me all along. The spiral staircase behind me groaned softly as I descended into the middle levels of the lighthouse. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself weighed down my body. The dim light from my lantern barely penetrated the shadows, revealing glimpses of old furniture and scattered debris. Broken chairs leaned awkwardly, rusted hinges hanging from doors, and dust thick enough to catch in my eyelashes that in the corner of a small hallway, I noticed a partially open door leading into a tiny study. The room smelled of damp paper and mildew, a scent that settled deep into my chest. On the desk lay a thick logbook, larger than the ones I had seen upstairs, with a cover worn smooth from decades of hands turning its pages. The air felt almost alive around it, dense with anticipation, as though the lighthouse itself waited to share its secrets. That I opened the logbook carefully. The first page was neatly written in ink that had faded to brown, detailing the daily routines of Edwin Harrow, the keeper whose photograph I had glimpsed yesterday. The entries began innocuously, describing the maintenance of the light, repairs on the stone steps, and inspections of the foghorn. Yet, as I turned the pages, the writing shifted. The ink became blotchy, the lines uneven, almost frantic. The fog today is heavier than usual. Shapes move beyond the light's reach. They do not speak, but I feel their intent. The lighthouse remembers. It whispers. I hear it calling my name, the shiver crawled up my spine. I closed my eyes briefly, listening. Only the rain, the wind, and the distant ocean answered. Yet the hairs on the back of my neck stood at attention. Something had been here, watching. That as I read further, I discovered entries detailing strange events that defied logic. Shadows that lingered too long, reflections in the broken windows that did not match reality, voices echoing in empty rooms. One line made my blood run cold. I no longer know if the shadows are mine, or if I belong to them. I set the logbook down momentarily and surveyed the room. Shelves lined the walls, filled with papers, old maps of the coastline, and photographs of storm-tossed ships. One photograph caught my eye, a shipwreck I didn't recognize, partially submerged beneath a gray sky, waves crashing against jagged rocks. On closer inspection, faint figures seemed to move along the deck, impossible in a still image. A sudden creak behind me made me whirl around. Nothing. Only the shadows stretching across the corners of the room. I laughed softly to myself, though the sound felt hollow. Still, the sense of being observed was undeniable. Returning to the logbook, I noticed that later entries became almost unreadable. Ink smears obscured entire lines, yet I could make out fragments. The fog grows impatient, the reflections stare too long, voices promise safety but lie. I cannot leave. The rhythm of the writing suggested panic, urgency. I ran my finger along a particularly dark line and realized the ink was slightly wet. My heart leapt. Was it condensation from the lighthouse, or had someone touched this recently? I forced myself to take a deep breath. This was a story, a record of a man lost in isolation, nothing more, but then a faint whisper, carried by the draft of the broken windows, tickled my ear. Do not linger, do not linger, do not linger. I froze. The sound was barely audible, yet it penetrated deeper than the wind or rain. It seemed to originate from the logbook itself. My instincts screamed to leave, yet my curiosity chained me to the room. One more page. I needed to know the conclusion, the fate of Edwin Harrow. My eyes scanned quickly, almost desperate to escape the tension building in my chest. They are patient. They wait for those who linger too long. I have seen faces in the glass that are not mine. My reflection follows me when I am elsewhere. I write these words knowing the fog watches. The light remembers, and soon, so will I. A distant crash of waves punctuated the entry. My lantern flickered, casting the room in erratic shadows that stretched across the walls. Something moved in the corner of my eye, a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. That I stood abruptly, knocking the logbook to the floor. It landed with a thud that echoed unnaturally, reverberating as though the lighthouse amplified the sound. I caught a glimpse of my own shadow, or was it something else, sliding along the walls, stretching too long, moving in ways my body could not replicate. The air grew heavier, charged, like static before a storm. The fog outside the windows thickened, curling into the room as if trying to enter. I took a step backward, tripping over a chair. Pain shot through my ankle, but I ignored it. My attention was drawn to a small mirror leaning against the far wall. That I had not seen it before. The glass was warped and old, but in its reflection, the room seemed wrong. Shadows that should have been stationary wavered, figures appeared behind me that weren't there when I turned, and the rain outside distorted into a gray veil that seemed almost alive. That I approached the mirror cautiously. The reflection shifted as I moved, lagging behind my motions by a fraction of a second. I raised my hand, and the hand in the mirror paused, hesitated, then followed. A soft, breathy whisper floated through the room. You came, now you remain. My heart thundered. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the lantern, and it cast a spinning circle of light across the floor. The shadows outside the mirror's frame seemed to reach toward me, stretching impossibly. My body screamed to run, yet my mind was trapped, reading, observing, understanding the depth of the lighthouse's power over those who lingered. The logbook lay at my feet. I reached down, flipping through the remaining pages. There were sketches, maps of hidden staircases and rooms, annotations marking areas where the fog was thickest. Notes suggested methods of escape, or perhaps traps for the unwary. One margin note, written hastily, caught my eye: "The beacon will guide you, but not to safety. Follow it at your own peril." A sudden chill swept through the room, extinguishing my lantern for an instant. Darkness swallowed me. When the light returned, the fog outside had thickened to the point I could no longer see the cliffs or the waves below. The lighthouse was no longer just a building, it was a living entity, patient, ancient, and aware of my presence. That I could hear it now: faint creaks, whispers, the soft tapping of footsteps on the stairs above, though the lighthouse was supposed to be empty. I realized then that the logbook was not just a record, it was a warning, a guide, and a lure. That I stepped backward, tripping over another chair, and a soft laugh, almost human but impossibly distant, drifted from somewhere within the walls. My pulse raced, but the fog seemed to settle, watching patiently, like a predator studying its prey. The lighthouse remembered everything, every visitor, every whispered secret. And now, so would I, whether I wished it or not. The lighthouse seemed alive now, its silence heavy with expectation. I stepped carefully over the uneven floorboards, my lantern's dim glow revealing walls warped with age and shadows that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the storm outside. Every creak of the spiral staircase felt deliberate, echoing like a warning through the stone corridors. That I knew the fog had thickened outside. I could barely see the cliffs, the ocean, or the edge of the lighthouse grounds. Yet something urged me forward, deeper into the structure, toward the beacon I had glimpsed in my first ascent. My instincts screamed to flee, yet curiosity tethered me like a chain, invisible but unyielding. Ascending the spiral staircase again, I noticed the walls now bore marks I hadn't seen before, faint scratches in the wood, some forming crude symbols, others jagged and frantic, as though clawed by hands desperate to escape. I reached out, tracing one with a finger. It felt cold, almost alive. A whisper tickled my ear: "The fog sees you, the fog waits." I spun, lantern raised, but the hallway was empty. Only the shadows danced, flickering unnaturally. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I moved faster, though cautiously, as if the lighthouse itself might punish a misstep. Halfway to the top, a faint light shimmered through the fogged windows. It wasn't the beacon yet, it was smaller, warmer, flickering like a candle. I approached and found a tiny alcove where a single lantern hummed, swaying slightly, though no wind reached this interior corner. Its glow revealed something remarkable: footprints, fresh and wet, leading from the staircase into the wall. They stopped abruptly. That I knelt, examining them. The impressions were small, uneven, and impossible to place. They didn't match my own, nor any human stride I knew. The lantern flickered violently, casting long, twisted shadows across the walls. In the mirror across the hall, I saw movement, just at the edge of vision, a figure, tall and thin, standing motionless. When I blinked, it vanished. A soft scratching began from above, echoing down the stairwell. My pulse quickened. The lighthouse was not empty. Whoever, or whatever, had been here before was still present, watching, waiting. I climbed the final stretch of stairs, every step a measured risk. My lungs burned, legs quivering, yet I could not stop. At the top, the beacon chamber sprawled open, glass cracked and fog curling inside. The room smelled of salt, wet stone, and a faint metallic tang. Shadows clung to every corner, stretching unnaturally. I raised my lantern higher. The light bounced across the room, revealing the massive mechanism of the beacon, rusted and silent. That a sudden movement outside the cracked glass caught my eye. I approached cautiously. Through the fog, shapes drifted, thin, elongated, moving as if weightless. They glided closer, halting just beyond the window. My reflection in the cracked glass shifted slightly, lagging behind my movements. A whisper, "You cannot leave, you follow too far." The words made my blood run cold. I took a step back. My own shadow, elongated and distorted, seemed to stretch toward the shapes outside. A gust of wind rattled the broken glass, sending chills down my spine. The fog pressed closer, curling tendrils inside the chamber, brushing against my skin like icy fingers. That I turned to inspect the beacon mechanism. The rusted gears were still, yet faint scratchings along the metal spoke of movement. Tiny etchings, perhaps from a previous keeper, marked warnings I could barely decipher in the lantern's flicker. The fog is patient. Those who linger will be remembered. I swallowed hard, the room feeling smaller, heavier, as though the lighthouse itself leaned in to observe. I scanned the chamber and noticed an old hatchway leading to a narrow passage, its entrance almost concealed behind the beacon's shadow. Hesitation clawed at me, but I knew instinctively this passage held the key to understanding, or perhaps escaping, the lighthouse's strange hold. The passage was tight, stone walls slick with moisture. Water dripped from above, echoing softly into the chamber below. My lantern cast eerie, long shadows, revealing scratches along the stone, symbols I did not recognize. With each step, the fog seemed to follow me, curling into the passage, whispering incoherently, "Do not linger, do not linger, do not linger." My pulse hammered in my chest. Shapes shifted within the fog, distant yet unnervingly close. The narrow corridor seemed endless, but faint light flickered ahead, like a candle fighting the darkness. I moved toward it, every nerve on edge, aware of something breathing just beyond my perception. Finally, the corridor opened into a small chamber. It appeared to be an observation room, once used to monitor the cliffs and the sea below. Broken instruments lay scattered, a brass telescope, rusted compasses, water-stained charts. Yet the strangest feature was the large mirror along one wall, its surface warped and uneven. That I approached cautiously. In its reflection, I saw not only myself but the fog beyond the windows moving as though alive, shapes forming and dispersing, whispering unintelligibly. One figure stood out, tall, thin, unmoving. Yet when I blinked, it was gone. The mirror seemed to hold it, a prisoner of glass, waiting for me to notice. That a soft, breathy whisper, "The fog remembers, the fog always remembers." I staggered backward, nearly tripping over the debris. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my chest. The rain outside intensified, hammering against the lighthouse, mixing with distant waves crashing into jagged cliffs. I realized then that the lighthouse itself was alive, not wood and stone, but something older, patient, aware of those who entered. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the beacon above. I looked up just in time to see a shadow dart across the broken glass, gone as quickly as it appeared. My lantern flickered violently, threatening to die, and I felt a pull in my chest, as if the fog itself were reaching inside, testing my resolve. That I took a deep breath, steadying my shaking hands. I had come too far to turn back now. The whispers, the shapes, the reflections, all pieces of a puzzle I had yet to solve. Somewhere in this fog, in this lighthouse, the answers awaited. And I had no choice but to follow them, deeper into the unknown. The small observation room felt alive. The mirror on the wall was no longer just glass, it was a portal of sorts, a surface that seemed to breathe and shift. I stood frozen, watching my reflection hesitate, lagging behind my movements by a fraction of a second. A shadowy figure lingered behind me in the glass, tall and impossibly thin, its presence undeniable, yet absent from reality. My breath caught. I reached out, hand trembling, and touched the cold surface. The mirror rippled like liquid, distorting my fingers, elongating them, stretching them into shapes that should not exist. The whisper came again, soft but deliberate. Do you see, or do you dare to move? A shiver ran through me, my skin prickling. I staggered backward, almost tripping over a rusted telescope. The shadow in the mirror moved closer, gliding across the glass without disturbing the room. My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed danger, yet I could not look away. The reflection was compelling, hypnotic, like the fog outside drawing me into its endless gray. The room itself seemed to contract, walls bending subtly, ceilings lowering. I realized then that the lighthouse was not merely a building, it was a vessel, alive, aware, responding to my fear and curiosity. I glanced around desperately for another exit, but the only doors led back into the fog-drenched corridor. A soft metallic scraping echoed from the corner. I turned slowly and saw a shadow flicker across the floor, small and irregular, like a child moving in slow motion. The mirror responded, elongating the figure, stretching it across the glass in impossible proportions. My mind screamed to run, yet my feet remained planted. I forced myself to breathe, trying to steady the lantern in my hand. Its light revealed fragments of the past, etched symbols along the walls, tiny scratches in the wood-forming letters, words barely legible. One phrase repeated itself, haunting in its simplicity. The fog reflects, the fog remembers, the fog takes. The whispering grew louder, more coherent. Voices layered over one another, half a dozen, maybe more. Some echoed my own thoughts, repeating my fears, twisting them into unfamiliar rhythms. Shapes swirled in the mirror, faces I did not recognize, stretching and melting into one another. Each blink brought a new horror. I stumbled closer, almost compelled to speak to the reflection. My voice trembled. Who are you? What do you want? No response, only the slow, deliberate movement of shadows in the glass. The figure behind me grew clearer, a man, or something like a man, with hollow eyes that burned with intent. His lips moved, forming words I could not hear. The fog outside pressed against the windows, curling inside, reaching with unseen hands. A sudden realization struck me. The lighthouse was a trap for perception, a prison for those who looked too closely. The logbooks, the symbols, the corridors, they were all designed to draw attention, to test sanity, to lure curiosity into something older, more patient. I turned, desperate to escape, but the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire chamber. The lantern swung violently, casting fleeting light on the walls. Shadows danced, merging, twisting, forming faces that grinned with impossible intent. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, the mirror shifted again. This time, my reflection moved independently. It raised a hand, pointing toward the hatch I had entered from. But then it smiled, my lips forming a grin I had never made. A whisper, this time unmistakable, echoed directly in my mind, "You are already part of it. You cannot leave unchanged." Panic surged. I stumbled backward, knocking over the rusted telescope. The mirror responded instantly, the figure lunging forward, its hand reaching out as if to touch me through the glass. My fingers brushed the surface, cold, liquid, alive. The fog outside hissed like a serpent, curling through the cracked windows into the room that I backed toward the wall, tripping over a broken chair. My lantern flickered and died, plunging the chamber into near darkness. The mirror glowed faintly, an unnatural light emanating from within. Shapes danced in the glow, figures I could neither name nor count. One step closer, and I felt the air thicken, pressing against my chest, constricting, as though the lighthouse were inhaling me. The whispers multiplied, voices overlapping, chanting in a rhythm both alien and familiar. The fog remembers, the fog reflects, the fog takes. Desperation drove me to the hatch. I yanked it open and scrambled through the narrow passage, the lantern's remnants slipping from my hand. Behind me, the mirror pulsed, a heartbeat of darkness, as if the lighthouse itself were alive and aware of my escape attempt. The shadows pressed closer, reaching, twisting, trying to pull me back. That I emerged into the corridor below, breath ragged, heart hammering. The fog was thicker than ever, curling into every corner, every crevice. The whispers followed, echoing from every direction, yet nowhere, fading and returning like waves crashing on jagged cliffs. I knew then that I had not escaped the lighthouse, only delayed its attention. The logbooks had warned me, the symbols had whispered, the reflections had revealed, the lighthouse was patient. It would wait for the curious, the restless, the seekers. And I had become one of them. That I pressed onward, deeper into the fog, the whispers fading behind me. But as I moved, I knew the reflection lingered, watching, waiting, marking me as a part of its memory. The lighthouse would remember me long after the fog settled again, long after the rain ceased, long after I had returned, or thought I had. The narrow corridor seemed endless, wet stone walls closing in as the fog pressed its cold fingers through every crack. My lungs burned with each breath, heart hammering like a drumbeat against my ribs. I had barely escaped the mirror chamber, yet the weight of the lighthouse's presence was inescapable. Each step forward felt guided, measured, as though the building itself had mapped my path. At the end of the passage, I stumbled into a larger chamber, dimly lit by a cracked lantern swinging from the ceiling. Dust floated in the light, motes drifting like tiny spirits. My eyes adjusted slowly, revealing a small desk against the wall. Papers were scattered across it, logs, letters, and journals, each yellowed with age. The handwriting was spidery, uneven, frantic. One journal caught my attention. The cover read simply, "The Keeper's Notes." My fingers trembled as I opened it, the pages brittle under my touch. The entries detailed the lighthouse's history, the keepers who had vanished, and the strange fog that clung like a living thing. "The lighthouse waits," one entry began. "It feeds on curiosity and fear. The fog is not natural. It is patient. Those who see too much, who linger too long, they are taken, absorbed into its memory." A chill ran down my spine. I realized that this wasn't just a building, it was a vessel, a prison, a sentient entity that existed between reality and something older, something beyond comprehension. Each keeper had left a warning, each visitor had vanished, and yet I had come too far to stop now that as I read further, a sudden sound made me freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed from the far corner of the room. My lantern's light flickered, revealing a shadow standing still, tall, hunched slightly, watching. My pulse raced. "Who's there?" I whispered, voice barely audible over the rain and wind. No response. The shadow remained, unmoving. I took a cautious step forward, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The figure seemed to grow taller, stretching toward the ceiling. A low, guttural whisper echoed, not through my ears, but directly in my mind. "Do you understand yet? The lighthouse remembers, and the fog records everything." The air grew colder. My breath fogged in front of me. Shapes swirled in the corners of my vision, figures that moved only when I blinked, disappearing when I looked directly at them. Panic surged, but I forced myself to breathe, to focus. The journal trembled in my hands. I turned a page and froze. A map had been drawn, showing hidden chambers, passages, and a spiral stairway descending below the lighthouse, into darkness deeper than the fog outside. A note scrawled in haste, "Below is the heart. Below is what the fog protects. Only the curious will reach it. Only the patient will see the keeper's secret." I knew instinctively that this was the path forward. My pulse hammered, fear mingling with determination. I placed the journal on the desk, taking the flickering lantern with me, and moved toward the stairway hidden behind a false panel. The descent was slow and treacherous. Water seeped through the stone walls, dripping rhythmically onto the floor. The fog followed, curling through the stairwell, brushing my skin, whispering incoherently. My shadow stretched along the walls, distorted and elongated, merging occasionally with shapes in the mist. Finally, I reached the bottom. The chamber below was enormous, circular, lit by an unnatural glow emanating from a pool of mist that hovered above the floor. Symbols etched into the walls pulsed faintly, glowing with a soft, eerie light. In the center stood a figure, a keeper, perhaps, or something older, watching me silently. The figure's face was obscured, but the presence was undeniable. I felt a weight pressing on my chest, a mix of dread and awe. The fog swirled around the figure, forming shapes that whispered, laughed, and wept all at once that I stepped closer. "Who? What are you?" I asked, voice trembling. The figure extended a hand toward me. I felt the fog wrap around my fingers, cold and soft, tugging me toward the center of the chamber. Whispers flooded my mind. The lighthouse chooses, the fog records, the keeper waits. Memories I didn't recognize flashed in my mind, faces of past visitors, past keepers, moments of terror and curiosity, all stored, all preserved by the lighthouse. I realized then that the entity was not malicious in the human sense. It was a recorder, a preserver, feeding on attention, observation, and fear. Those who lingered became part of it, living on in its memory. That I stumbled backward, trying to escape, but the fog tightened, guiding me gently yet insistently toward the figure. The whispers became a chorus. "Do you accept the knowledge? Do you accept the memory? Or do you turn away?" My mind raced. Escape seemed impossible, yet surrendering meant becoming part of the lighthouse's eternal memory, trapped in the fog for who knew how long. I took a deep breath, heart pounding that I made a choice, that I stepped forward, hand reaching toward the keeper. The fog embraced me, cold and soft, and the whispers became clearer, forming words I could understand. You are patient. You are curious. Now you remember. The chamber shifted, the mist swirling faster, symbols on the walls glowing brighter. I felt knowledge flood my mind, the history of the lighthouse, the keepers, the fog, the endless cycle of observation and preservation. I became part of its memory, yet I remained aware enough to tell the story, aware enough to survive. When the fog finally receded, I found myself at the base of the lighthouse again. The storm had calmed, the rain softened to a gentle drizzle, and the sea was quiet. The journal lay at my feet, open to the last page. I read, "Those who seek shall remember. Those who remember shall tell the tale. Beware the fog, for it waits for the next curious soul." I looked back at the lighthouse. Shadows still clung to its walls, moving in the corners of vision, flickering like memories. I knew the keeper was still there, still waiting, still recording. And I would carry the memory forward. The journal slipped from my trembling hands, its pages fluttering shut as if it, too, wished to keep its secrets hidden. I staggered backward, the keeper's whisper still thrumming in my skull like a second heartbeat. You remember now. But memory is a curse as much as it is a gift. The air around me had grown heavier, thicker, as though every breath was drawn not from air but from the fog itself. My lungs ached with each inhale, my body screaming for escape. The lighthouse had shown me its truth, and now it was watching, waiting to see whether I would become another shadow within its endless memory. That I turned toward the spiral stairway that led upward. The stone steps were slick beneath my boots, water dripping steadily from above. The lantern shook in my grasp, its flame guttering with each draft of cold air. Shadows raced along the curved walls, sometimes ahead of me, sometimes behind, always moving just beyond sight. Each step echoed like a drumbeat of warning. At the top, I pushed against the wooden door. It resisted at first, swollen with dampness and age, then burst open with a groan, spilling me back into the keeper's quarters. The room was different now. Where once there had been scattered papers and a broken desk, now there were rows of mirrors, cracked, warped, and fogged with condensation. That and why reflections stared back at me from a dozen angles. Some smiled when I didn't. Some blinked slower than my own eyes. One, at the far end, tilted its head, studying me like prey. Panic surged. I dropped the lantern, the glass shattering, flame extinguishing in a hiss. Darkness rushed in, broken only by the faint silver glow of moonlight filtering through cracks in the walls. My reflections lingered even without light, pale figures in glass, shifting when I turned away. That I bolted for the door. The hallway beyond stretched unnaturally long, each step pulling me deeper rather than closer to the exit. The walls pulsed faintly, as though alive, breathing in rhythm with my racing heart. The whispers returned, overlapping, endless. Stay, remember, you cannot leave. My hands brushed the cold stone as I ran, fingertips leaving trails of moisture on the slick surface. The air smelled of salt and rust, heavy with the weight of centuries. Finally, the corridor ended, opening onto the lighthouse's main stairwell, spiraling upward toward the beacon. That I hesitated. Escape meant the storm outside, the black sea, the consuming fog. But staying meant surrendering to the keeper's memory forever. My choice had already been made the moment I stepped inside that I began to climb. The stairs seemed endless, coiling higher and higher, each creak of the wooden steps threatening collapse. Wind howled through shattered windows, flinging icy spray across my face. My legs burned with effort, but I pressed on, each step dragging me closer to freedom. Halfway up, I paused, chest heaving. Below me, shadows ascended the stairwell, dozens of them, moving without sound, without haste, yet gaining ground. Their forms shifted with each glance, sometimes human, sometimes twisted, elongated, impossible that I forced myself upward, ignoring the ache in my muscles. The final landing loomed above, the door to the lantern room swaying on rusted hinges. I pushed through, stumbling into the highest chamber of the lighthouse. The beacon was shattered, its great glass lens fractured, shards littering the floor. Rain poured through holes in the roof, hissing as it struck the remnants of the lamp. The fog pressed against the windows, alive, eager, coiling like smoke waiting to be inhaled, and there, through the broken glass, I saw it. My boat. A speck against the black sea, tethered still to the rocks below. My only escape that I turned toward the stairs, but the shadows had arrived. They filled the room silently, dozens of them, their eyes pale and unblinking. Among them stood the keeper, its presence towering, inevitable. The whispers filled the chamber, deafening, drowning out the storm outside. "You cannot leave, you are part of us now." I clenched my fists. "No. I will not stay." The fog surged inward, smashing glass, rattling the walls. My body moved before thought. I climbed onto the railing, balanced for a heartbeat above the abyss, and leapt. The fall tore the breath from my lungs. Wind whipped against my face, rain stung like knives, and the roar of the ocean swallowed all sound. For a moment, I felt weightless, suspended between the lighthouse above and the black sea below. Then the water struck, cold, crushing, endless. The sea dragged me under, spinning me through darkness, filling my mouth and lungs with salt. I fought upward, arms burning, kicking desperately until my head broke the surface. The fog was everywhere, shapes moved within it, hands brushing my shoulders, voices murmuring my name. My boat drifted only feet away, rocking gently, impossibly close yet maddeningly distant. I forced my body forward, every stroke a battle against exhaustion. When I reached the boat, my fingers clawed at the slick wood, dragging myself aboard with the last strength I possessed. I collapsed onto the planks, coughing seawater, chest heaving, vision blurring. The fog clung to the boat, curling over the edges like curious fingers. But the lighthouse receded, its towering shadow swallowed by the storm. The keeper's whispers faded, leaving only the sound of rain and waves. That I lay there, shivering, drenched, staring at the dark sky above. Had I escaped? Or had the lighthouse merely let me go? Another story to tell, another memory to carry into the world. The fog lingered, watching, waiting, and deep inside, I knew, the lighthouse was not finished with me. Not yet.